Stoa is a digital campfire where we cohere in dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of what's happening now.
Boom. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. I'm Peter Lindbergh, the steward of the Stoa. And the Stoa is a place for us to cohere and dialogue about what matters most at the knife's edge of this very moment. And today we have Adam Ray Adkins from the podcast and YouTube channel, The Acid Left. His co-host, Mike Watson, who's the author of, I think, The Left Can Meme from Zero Books, was supposed to be here as well, but he couldn't make it. So it's Adam is going to be here and give us a presentation. So how I first came across this Acid Left thing, Jeremy Johnson, who's a friend of the Stoa, was talking about them. And I just reached out on a whim because I thought they were like this emerging mimetic tribe in the noosphere, and they might be. And so I'm really looking forward for this talk and engaging in what the acid left is, talk about Mark Fisher and his idea of acid communism, capitalist realism, and all that good stuff. So how today is going to work, Adam is going to give a presentation, and he's also going to share a music video, and it might be a little trippy, so warning if strobes and stuff like that are not your thing. And after that, we're going to have a Q&A. So anytime when Adam is talking, just put your questions in the chat box. I will call on you to unmute yourself to ask your question to Adam. If you want me to read on your behalf, because this will go on YouTube eventually, just indicate that and I will do so. So I think that is everything. So Adam, welcome to the Stoa, and I will take you in. Oh, you're on mute. You just got to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. It's nice to be here. Yeah, so I'll be doing this today normally with Mike Watson. He wrote Can the Left Learn to Meme? And also Conceptual Militancy, both out on Zero Books. And then we've been doing this podcast for a few months, though we've been working together for a little over a year under a couple different names and just under our own projects. I am a visual artist primarily. I do a lot of mixed media painting that has incorporated politics and philosophy, and then I do some like sound manipulation and stuff like that. I wanted to start by reading a poem. So this is a poem I wrote that's called 10,000 Years in the Life of a Shelf-Stable Reverse Osmosis Pulsar. If I lived 27,378 years, I would lose 1 billion hairs. 99% of billionaires are not billed. 1/4 of prescriptions are not filled. Mixing Damiana and Valerian rather than being NyQuil. Keep it raw, keep it raw, keep it raw, not grilled. Want to have a voice? Invent a language. Get quilled. Want to stay living on the Bay Coast? Get gilled. Supermassive black hole. Truth floats around us, gaseous. Supermassive black hole. Utopia arises out of sinking paradises, supermassive black hole. Truth comes down on us, distilled. Consciousness begins to condensate, distilled. Consciousness as a liquid state, distilled. Flow over the cup, flow over the vase, distilled. Flowing from a distant place. Contemplate. Existence as a liquid state. Coming from a different space. Contemplate. The complexities of the gaseous mass and the societal structures of bacteria living in intestinal tracts. Saw the future, saw the future, saw the future, not thrilled. These bastards are actors, not masters. Their labor is stolen and unskilled. Don't celebrate at the ceremony. The value and debt are both phony. Leave your loans unpaid, perceptions unfilled. 99% of billionaires are not billed. I saw the future, saw the future, saw the future, not thrilled. Knock it down, knock it down, knock it down, rebuild. All right, thank you. So I wanted to read a poem, and then I want to show this music video at the end, because a lot of what we're really trying to emphasize is alternative forms of knowledge outside of what might be classified as like dry academic forms of understanding. Now, we are heavily influenced around the ideas of Mark Fisher and acid communism. So to get into that real fast, we have to understand what capitalist realism is. Capitalist realism is a concept Fisher coined that kind of sums up the quote from Frederick Jameson that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than it is the end of capitalism. So this is the idea that our imagination has really stopped producing the novel, that it reproduces either an apocalyptic scenario or capitalism kind of going on forever and ever. Even in a lot of science fiction, the future presented still remains largely capitalist. You can see this in Margaret Thatcher's statements, such as like, there is no alternative. And then Fisher also pointed to the assassination and coup against Salvador Allende in Chile as a major starting point, like the nail in the coffin that creates capitalist realism, because it offered an alternative both to Western capitalism as well as Soviet-style authoritarianism, which is an important part of the project that runs throughout Fisher, from capitalist realism through all of his writings, is a rejection of the more authoritarian elements that were associated with communism through the, actually existing socialism, as it's been known to call. So then acid communism, Fisher late in his life, he was working on the book Acid Communism right before his death. And the intro to this was published in the repeater collection K-Punk, which is mostly his old blogs, some interviews, and some music writing. So, and then also contains the unfinished introduction to acid communism, which he sums up kind of as the convergence of class consciousness, socialist feminist consciousness raising, and psychedelic consciousness, the fusion of new social movements with the communist project, an unprecedented asceticization of everyday life. So kind of looking back and seeing how in the 60s and 70s, the counterculture movements never quite were fully taken serious by the left, and vice versa. So a wish for those to come back together, because in those movements, the important thing is the psychedelic as a space and as a way of perceiving reality. The psychedelic deals with both space and time. It's a folding of the outside in and the inside out. It's about the erasure of boundaries of the self and the world, of the mind and the body. And importantly, it does not only do with drugs. We could also point to things like meditation, art, or especially music, as it is kind of more of a temporal art form than, say, a painting or something like that. It forces you to engage with time in a specific way. So we find that it's important to deal with the psychedelic to engage the imagination, to re-engage the imagination, which has been crushed by capitalism, and also to save the psychedelic from being colonized by capitalism, because this is a very possible threat that we see to this. And the various ways that you could have the psychedelic itself be colonized, I think there's obvious historical examples here, such as the original counterculture movements, like the hippies and stuff, actually became much more conservative over time. You have big capitalist figures such as Steve Jobs, or like the people that created Whole Foods, actually saying that psychedelics in their past were very important for them and kind of like put them where they are now. You see this today in workplace mindfulness practices, large Fortune 500 companies that also have their workers engage in yoga breaks, or tech startups in Silicon Valley where almost everyone is microdosing LSD or psilocybin mushrooms. They've kind of taken the radical dimension that the psychedelic movements originally had in them and repurpose them or strip them of that element. I also believe that in the psychedelic communities existing today, there is a strong right-wing element. Now, of course, not everyone in there is right-wing, and I don't think it leans this way naturally. I'm not sure the psychedelic leans left or right naturally. You do have a thought that that left-leaning stuff is naturally psychedelic, or that the psychedelic is naturally left-leaning with its questions of authority and kind of erasures of boundary that we already touched on. But it's not true. Spiritualism, psychedelia, transcendent states all have, of course, reactionary elements within them. Today, we can see this in the psychedelic community through like organic unity or the return to nature, this kind of position of a lost man that needs to connect back to something that was great. I would fundamentally reject this. You see the ideas of levels of enlightenment that end up actually justifying injustice in the world. So, this idea that through some kind of psychic vibration or something, that you're actually inviting suffering onto you, so that when people experience poverty, they experience loss, it's seen as something to do with their spiritual state. And then also the ideas that are prominent in the psychedelic communities of shadow forces, which often leads to conspiracy thinking. So the shadow forces obviously would be on the sides where you look at psychedelic ideas of the Illuminati or dark wizards, evil magic, stuff like that, and then leaning into reptilian control theories, which have their structural similarity to anti-Semitic theories running throughout history, sometimes being almost word for word. So that's what I'm talking about, acid communism and some elements of psychedelia. Why the acid left? Well, we are inspired by Fisher pretty heavily. That's what brought Mike and myself together, along with Terry Tapp, having these conversations. But we're not only inspired by Mark Fisher. Our goal is not to be a channel that specifically tries to explain and explore Fisher only. Mike and I both have our own influences that go beyond Fisher, and would have our own critiques of Fisher in various portions. So we didn't want to just say, oh, we create content under the name of acid communism. We're not saying we are acid communism. We're creating content that we think is inspired by these ideas, that there's a lot of questions Fisher's work leaves, and we're just trying to take up some of those questions and ask some more of our own. Left because essentially we are leftists, and but we're also trying to build that broader association there, that maybe the word communism in its forthrightness can off-put people, though I myself would consider myself a communist. So what we basically do is we produce lots of memes which have a psychedelic aesthetic, or some kind of boundary pushing or boundary eliminating purpose. We have created music in the past and visuals to go along with the music. We do a podcast which interviews various people working either in some kind of left academia, left journalism, psychedelic writing, or artist. And we've also been doing the Beyond Linguistics reading group. And in that, we read theory or philosophy, and then we interpret it as visual arts, memes, or some kind of music or poem. So in that, we're like actually transforming actively the theory that we're going through and trying to understand it in a different way for someone who may not actually go through and read those dense texts sometimes. So that's my little presentation, and I do want to play a song. We're going to play a music video for it. This is called A Serious Joke. It samples heavily from Mark Fisher's Acid Communist Introduction. So, here we just tried to make it fun, make it something that would be enjoyable to listen to, but also produces certain like sensory feelings in the individual that's engaging it. I do want to stress again, it uses heavy flashing, strobe, psychedelic color changes. So if you are sensitive to that, I would probably not watch the video. So let me pull this up. Oh, I'll also say that this video was made, the Zero Books channel actually hosted it for us, and it was made around the Corbyn election. So there is a brief little Corbyn plug at the beginning. I didn't. Sorry about this, y'all. I have to. Turn my screen sharing on. This is not something I do often, if you can't tell.
We love technical issues here at the Stoa. It's an opportunity for us to practice our stoicism, so no rush. You do have co-host access, so you should
cool.
have screen share.
I do. I just clicked out of it for a moment. Screen.
There we go.
But let me make sure. All right, I got audio.
Register to vote and vote Labour.
Does that come through? The audio?
Yep.
All right.
For a fairer society.
Cut the working hours. Increase the number of jobs. Increase the amount of the salary. Transform production and place it under workers' control. Liberation of the huge amount of intelligence that is wasted by capitalism. Technology has been used so far as a means of control and exploitation. It wants to be turned into a tool for liberation. Working less is possible thanks to the application of cybernetics and informatics. Zero work for income. Automate all production. All power to living labor. All work to dead labor. Of course, we now know that the revolution did not happen. But the material conditions for such a revolution are more in place in the 21st century than they were in 1977. What has shifted beyond all recognition since then is the existential and emotional atmosphere. Populations are resigned to the sadness of work, even as they are told that automation is making their jobs disappear. We must regain the optimism of that 70s moment, just as we must carefully analyze all the machineries that capital deployed to convert confidence into dejection. Understanding how this process of consciousness deflation works is the first step to reversing it.
What is the bad news we already know is that the dimension of the future has disappeared. That in some ways that we're marooned, we're trapped in the 20th century still. That what is it to be in the 21st century is to have 20th century culture on higher definition screens. Or 20th century culture distributed by high-speed internet. So there's a strange, what ought to be a strange sense of repetition, of a clotted or blocked time, a time that's in many respects slowed down or flattened or retired or gone backwards. You can look back to the Gita Ball period, Gita Ball's 60s, the spectacle. Again, it seems like some genteel period. You had to put TV on, see an advertising billboard in order to be commanded, or have your nervous system assailed by the urgencies of capitalism. Now we carry them around at all times with us. And it's important to remember, in Deleuze describes communication is a command. This is when we open up, we look at our smartphones, essentially it's being a command. And this is a weight on a nervous system that wasn't previously there. We're facing these hundreds of commands every day, which we may well ignore them. Obviously, we have to ignore them, we can't possibly follow them. Nevertheless, the strain on our nervous system must be telling to some level.
It may be a temporary setback. I would not say, as practically everyone says, let's apply it to this country, that the student movement was defeated, that it doesn't exist. It has changed its form, it still exists. And what is to me the most important thing, some of the values proclaimed by the student movement have actually penetrated the society as a whole and are diffused among the population as a whole. For example, let me give you one example, otherwise it's too abstract. The almost general awareness that one does not have to work 8 hours a day plus the hours required for transportation in an inhuman and routine and mechanized way, that one can live much easier without giving up most of the achievements of culture and so on. This is one of the achievements of the student movement, and this can be demonstrated, by the way.
All its carnivalesque departures from everyday reality, however, this is no remote utopia. It feels like an actual social space, one you can imagine really existing. You are as likely to come upon a crank or a huckster as a poet or musician here, and who knows if today's crank might turn out to be tomorrow's genius. It is also an egalitarian and democratic space, and a certain affect presides over everything. There is multiplicity, but little sign of resentment or malice. It is a space for fellowship, for meeting, and talking as much for having your mind blown. The crucial defining feature of the psychedelic is the question of consciousness and its relationship to what is experienced as reality. If the very fundamentals of our experience, such as our sense of space and time, can be altered, does that not mean that the categories by which we live are plastic, mutable? Yet the claim that altered states of consciousness took you 1,000,000 miles away from reality was question-begging. It foreclosed the idea that altered state of consciousness could offer a perception of the systems of power, exploitation, and ritual that was more, not less, lucid than ordinary consciousness. In the 60s, when consciousness was increasingly besieged by the fantasies and images of advertising and capitalist spectacle, how solid was the reality from which psychedelic states fled in any case? Wasn't the state of consciousness susceptible to spectacle more like somnambulance than alertness or awareness? In retrospect, one of the most remarkable features of the psychedelic culture of the 1960s was the way it mainstreamed such metaphysical questions. Experiments with consciousness were now in principle open to anyone. Despite all the mysticism and pseudo-spiritualism which has always hung over psychedelic culture, there was actually a demystificatory and materialist dimension to this. Widespread experiments with consciousness promised nothing less than a democratization of neurology itself, a newly widespread awareness of the brain's role in producing what was experienced as reality. Those on acid trips were externally seeing the workings of their own brain, and potentially learning to use their brains differently. Yet psychedelic experiences were not confined to those who had taken drugs.
Rather than invoking an actually existent past and comparing it with the present, I think the point from which we can criticize the current moment, the point at which it can be found wanting, is in terms of the futures that were projected from the 20th century, not the actually existing past. That it's the shocking difference between what we thought might have happened and what actually is.
On one level, the 60s revolt was an impressive illustration of Lenin's remark that the capitalist will sell you the rope to hang him with. In the UK, Stuart Hall felt similar frustrations with much of the existing left frustrations that were all the more intense in his case because he thought of himself as a socialist. But the socialism that Cole wanted, a socialism that could engage with the yearnings and dreamings that he heard in Miles Davis' music, was yet to be created, and its arrival was obstructed as much by figures from the left as from the right. The first obstructive figure of the left was the complacent steward of more organized labor or social democracy, backward-looking, bureaucratic, resigned to the inevitability of capitalism, more interested in preserving the income and status of white men than in expanding the struggle to include. This figure is defined by compromise and eventual failure. The other figure, what I want to call the harsh Leninist superego, is defined by its absolute refusal of compromise. According to Freud, the superego is characterized by the quantitatively and qualitatively excessive nature of its demands. Whatever we do, it's never enough. The harsh Leninist superego mandates a militant ascesis. The militant will be single-mindedly dedicated to the revolutionary event, and unflinchingly committed to the means necessary to bring it about. The harsh Leninist superego is as indifferent to suffering as it is hostile to pleasure. Lenin's spoken response to music is instructive here. I can't listen to music too often. It affects your nerves, makes you want to say stupid nice things and stroke the heads of people who could create such beauty while living in this vile hell. While the complacent leaders of organized labor were invested in the status quo, the harsh Leninist superego states everything on a world absolutely different to this one. It was this post-revolutionary world which would redeem the Leninist, and it was from the perspective of this world that they judged themselves. In the meantime, it is legitimate and indeed necessary to cultivate an indifference towards current suffering. We can and must step over homeless people, because giving to charity only obstructs the coming of the revolution. But this revolution had little in common with the social and psychic revolution of almost inconceivable magnitude that Ellen Willis thought was seated in the counterculture's dreamings. The revolution, as she conceived of it, would at once be more immediate and would fundamentally concern how care and domestic arrangements were organized, and more far-reaching. The transformed world would be unimaginably stranger than anything Marxist-Leninism had projected. A counter-exorcism of the specter of a world which could be free. Acid communism is the name I have given to this specter. The concept of acid communism is a provocation and a promise. It is a joke of sorts, but one with very serious purpose. It points to something that, at one point, seemed inevitable, but which now appears impossible: the convergence of class consciousness, socialist feminist consciousness raising, and psychedelic consciousness, the fusion of new social movements with a communist project, an unprecedented aestheticization of everyday life.
All right. All right. And that's that. I hope that sounded okay over there. And yeah, I'm ready if Peter or if anyone else has any questions.
Yeah, we might need a collective moment. It was pretty trippy.
Yeah,
So,
good.
So yeah, if anyone has questions, start throwing them in the chat. Yeah, I'll start off with one to warm you up. I'm curious how much the alt-right reactionary type tribes that, you know, Angela Nagel talks about in Kill All Normies and other spots in the Zero Book Psychology talk about influenced this kind of your acid left in their guerrilla warfare approach with meme magic and stuff like that. And I recall you guys talking about edgelords in one of your recent interviews.
Yeah. Well, I think it's definitely played a large part of it. So Wilhelm Reich, who's kind of a fringe figure from the German socialist movement who got into some really weird stuff. But he had this like little idea that basically the right wing was winning back then because it was kind of tapping into people's libidinal energies and allowing them to express that in some kind of way, while the left was, you know, quoting the GDP of India to them. And one's infinitely more appealing to a young person or a dispossessed person, you know. And alt-right kind of seized upon that as well by taking some of those transgressive politics. And we want to, yeah, definitely reclaim some of those transgressive politics for the left, and really engage in, yeah, mimetic warfare. Absolutely. I wouldn't shy away from that term by any means.
And the other question I had, like, I really like this approach, by the way. I sort of like through the back door combating or breaking the intersubjective and epistemic prisons we have so we can imagine new things. And the thing I'm curious about is, given my meta proclivities, like I have the capacity to be friends with all sorts of mimetic tribes. And then just to use two, for example, I have friends, people who vote for Trump, friends, people who are very progressive, quote unquote, woke. And, you know, just day-to-day gatherings, they're great people. I can feel their heart. But then there's people on, I would say, a lot of different mimetic tribes or different ideologies that are just sociopaths, you know, and I can't feel their heart. And so I wonder what your thought is on, but like, beyond the, you know, getting people out of you know, their cognitive prisons, about heart-based practices related to politics.
Right. I tend to be in favor of them. You know, I think actually that's one of the things that Fisher is talking about, consciousness raising, to bring that into the fold. I mean, I'm not super familiar with the term heart-based practices if it has like really specific connotations, but what I think you're getting at, I absolutely agree. And, you know, I in my day-to-day life, you know, I'm not an academic. I'm a working class person. I work at a grocery store. I make art. I go to coffee shops when there's not lockdowns. And I interact with people like that all the time. You know, I live in the South, and I lived in the Bible Belt of America for a long time, Tennessee. And yeah, I know lots of right-wing people in my family all throughout. And you have to talk to them. Of course, there does come points where it seems impossible or unproductive. And I would say that to the same thing for a right winger. You know, they have to talk to someone on the left wing, really, if they're going to maintain some kind of sanity in today. And I honestly believe a lot of that stuff really does come from traumas, from personal and social traumas. So I guess we would really emphasize social trauma, but addressing personal trauma is absolutely important as well. And building those bridges between people on an actual human level is, I mean, if you can't do that, then you're really missing something important that could lead to any kind of social revolution.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We have an upcoming event called the Trauma Scene here, about like, you know, this is the epoch we're in right now, contending with all this collective trauma. Okay, so let's pivot. We got some great questions in the chat. Andy, you have a question.
Hi, I'm wondering individually, rather than interpersonally, I look at the concept of hauntology as being able to view the space of something new. And the only way you can do that is by trying to eliminate your kind of unconscious biases of, let's say, a capitalist framework of how things exist now to how they could exist, that kind of a second order merging between whatever, communism, capitalism, socialism, something beyond. And so the question is, what are the skills that we can use to minimize this unconscious capitalist cultural framework to think hauntologically?
That's a great question. Now, I do have to say I'm not super familiar. I know a little bit Fisher's work on hauntology, but I think I can answer this as well, but maybe not quite in the hauntological realm. So I think a lot of those are listening to people, sharing stories, and really trying to understand between. Well, I guess this would be intrapersonal though. Trying to understand other people and expand yourself through them, to know their stories, to know their consciousness. Beyond that, I'm not sure how it really goes. I think often when people have these experiences, a psychedelic experience that kind of switches you to a different reality tunnel like that, it happens in a way that's hard to quantify afterwards. You can't really say what made you have that epiphany in those moments. So I'm not sure how to individually cultivate that. We look at the kind of forces and pressures that are upon us and kind of interpolate from there. I guess you could say trying to think about, Fisher talks about the trying to think about not what we are to capitalism, but what capitalism is to us, like for the worker or the everyday person. And thinking of it in ways of what it has to obscure, what it has to make sure doesn't happen, is collective joy. So if we think of it in that way and looking at what stops collective joy, what stops collective flourishing amongst yourself and amongst people, and then tracing, so that's really getting into like the social traumas, I would suppose, and then also trying to connect those social traumas with your own personal trauma. So connecting and then vice versa, your personal traumas, when dealing with them, seeing how they connect to larger social traumas. But I guess you have to already have that idea or framework in there, somewhat.
Andy, any follow-up?
No, that's helpful. I just defer to somebody else.
All right. Evan, you're up.
Hey, so I've really appreciated what you've been saying, and I really like this aesthetic. So I guess I have a question that I struggle with a lot myself, wanting to get your take on this, which is sort of the relationship between, more modern and present expressions of communism, the tension between that and the effectiveness of markets. So where I'm going with this is that markets seem to be obviously superior mechanisms of resource allocation to the sort of top-down command economies which were attempted to be implemented by the communist states of the past. And yet unfettered market capitalism obviously has all these terrible effects. So I think that we are, the communist analysis is correct, and that we should be really, really focused on the sort of distribution of the of profit between, say, capital and labor. We should be emphasizing the importance of labor in this sort of conversation a lot more. And so I'm totally with the communist program in that sense. But I also wonder what you think the relationship is, like maybe go, just kind of riff on like, how do we take the sort of optimization power of the idea of a competitive market, and how do we, bind that so that it is working in the service of human flourishing, human happiness, equality, all that good stuff. Like how do we sort of confront that reality of the 21st century where we have such a complicated world, and we need things like markets to optimize our resource chains, and yet markets unfettered are so destructive. So just, if you could riff on that for a bit.
Yeah. So let's see. I think like the Austrian school kind of has this way of viewing the market as like a computer or something like that, that does all those calculations. And yes, compared to the, like the Soviet economy, it may be more, it has something that the Soviet economy doesn't have, absolutely, or any of the other ones. But I don't know if I would necessarily call it more efficient. I do think a big portion of that may be technology itself. So during that time, really the biggest problem I think they faced was information. They didn't have all of the information that they truly needed if you wanted to make a planned economy like that. And part of that was because of their strict political repression, right? So like if a farmer thinks that he might be shot if he says the wrong thing, he's going to give the answer like to how much he can do, how much he's produced. He's going to give whatever answer he thinks you know, the Soviet bureaucrat or whatever wants to hear. But then also just the pure calculation at that time. I think today we really, with computing technology, with artificial intelligence and various algorithms and cybernetics, we really have that ability to plan a lot more than we did then. So, you know, one of the things that the Chilean government was working on as well was the cybernetics with their cybersyn, I think they called it, this vast ability to compute and calculate the various needs and resources of the society in not a top-down model, but more of a distributed model. You know, different nodes connecting and talking to each other. You see that today, like in certain people on like the accelerationist side, or even the Marxist like literary critic Frederick Jameson has talked about the idea of nationalizing Walmart and Amazon, because they basically have most of that calculating technology that would be required, you know, to do that kind of thing. They have the infrastructure there. It's just not there on the public level, serving the public need. Then though, to shift from that a little bit, some of it is redefining what is good and what the goals are. So, you know, a lot of this work is kind of directly related to the ideas of luxury communism, which, just like acid communism, is this smashing together of words that you wouldn't normally associate with each other and kind of forces you to change your definition of each of them. So producing public luxuries, like something that everyone has, you know, public housing infrastructures that are absolutely beautiful and just for every person, you know, that's working towards that would be vastly different than what we do now. And trying to reduce the working hours, trying to take away toil from jobs, from the labor that we have to do, and making sure that labor is going towards something for everyone, I think would automatically kind of change the way those markets are functioning. Because like, so maybe, and I'm also not for strong super predictions. Like I don't think our goal should be necessarily to lay out an exact blueprint by any means, even though I am also saying we should be inventing futures in a way. So maybe in the future, markets to an extent do exist, but not for things that are seen as absolutely essential for life, for, you know, social life, and not just a bare minimum life, but an actual beautiful life that everyone would enjoy, you know. So maybe markets become like a flea market almost. You know, you see that, like, people want to trade, they want to have commerce, they want to create, you know, artisanal goods or commodities on their own accord. If that's not the point of life, the point of society, then that's okay with me personally. Like, I don't care what those people do, and maybe that would kind of drive some of those, while the vast majority of stuff for everyone could be produced in some kind of way that doesn't rely on markets like that, but still takes in all that information in a distributive model where it's not top down, but people are working together and across the board. There probably, a lot of this really probably would rely on computing technology. which isn't necessarily my forte. I read about it, but I'm not a programmer and I don't quite understand it. I have to ask my tech friends to explain it to me.
Quick follow-up, if I may. So I'm very interested in this intersection that you're describing between sort of like emerging self-organizing organizational and knowledge structures, which are not top-down, and using that sort of method or perspective to reach the goal state, if you will, of like fully automated luxury space communism or whatever. And so I'm just wondering, I'm not super familiar with the thinkers in this area. Do you have any people, blogs, videos, books that you would recommend to explore this area more?
Yes, I think, so there's like the Inventing the Future by Nick, I can never say his last name and I always mess it up, but it starts with an S, and Alex Williams, I think. There's the Republic of Walmart book. I think Repeater put out a little collection called Futures and Fictions, which is really good as well. Kind of, it has some of that in there. Definitely deals with a lot of those themes. Other than that, I would have to look at a list more. Sorry. But maybe even like some science fiction, like Kim Stanley Robinson, something like that has elements of that as well. He describes these, like, in a lot of his books, these vast moments of time and how the societies gradually change into something else. And some of the societies he describes, like I'm thinking about the society in, what is it, 2112 or 2212, 2412, something like that. But it sounds pretty amazing and pretty close to this. It seems post-scarcity. No one's doing work that they don't want to do. The work that is done seems to be either self-motivated or for the good of all, yet there does seem to be some kind of market forces, like in smaller capacities as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. Adam, are you okay to stay 15 minutes after the hour, or do you have to leave right at the hour?
I can stay whenever, as long as you want.
Cool, because we got a bunch of great questions. I'd like to get to most of them. Harry, you had a follow-up question. If you can unmute yourself and ask it.
Yeah, so it's along these same lines, and maybe you already answered as much as you would answer. But my question, following up Evan's question, is what positive aspects of capitalism or our current economic system, or even our current social system, would you like to see brought forth and implemented in any new system that comes forth of, whatever the future of tomorrow you would want to look like? Is there anything you would bring forward that is currently being practiced?
Yes, I'm sure there is. I'm trying to think, though. That's an interesting question. I think there's positive aspects of capitalism, of course, in the way that most Marxists would, of its destroying of old forms of hierarchy and whatnot. But I think you're talking about actual practices. What is an actual? So maybe, in part, the ability to have separation between work and life. That's maybe something that could be explored, to how to make that positive. Because so before, in like a pre-capitalist society, your life and your work might be so completely tied up that really those identities are hard to parse out. And in capitalism, you definitely parse that out. Though today, as we're entering more of a society of control versus a society of discipline, and we're all kind of have precarious job employment, and connected through smart technology, it seems like that erasure is happening in a negative way. I think that's all I could answer for that. I'm sure there's more, though. I would just have to think on that exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess just another way of phrasing my question would be, is there a baby that you don't want to throw out with the bathwater?
Well, I mean, democracy as such, even though I don't think it's necessarily tied to capitalism by any means. I mean, we're seeing that with what you could argue with like China, where it seems to be some kind of strange form of authoritarian state capitalism to me. But democracy and that idea, liberty, fraternity, equality, like those are tied to liberalism as such. So maybe not capitalism, but they've been associated with it for a long time. And certainly the right, or someone who considers capitalism a positive thing, would probably consider those part of capitalism, especially if you're like referring to during Cold War era, for say like the authoritarian, non-democratic communist states versus the Western, nice, liberal, democratic states. So I think you do need to carry that on and carry on a strong form of anti-authoritarianism and libertarianism in the small L sense, not the American Libertarian Party, to carry those kind of attitudes from capitalism and maybe finally realize the ability. Capitalism promises this entrepreneurial spirit, this meritocracy, and I think I would say, I mean, that's pretty on its face been proven to not be true, even as meritocracy was actually coined as a word to make fun, as a satirical word. It's because it's kind of saying, yeah, there's a merit, but it's like in the aristocracy, they're inheriting their merit. But maybe from there to not carry those things on, but finally realize them, to move beyond them and past them, and like actually give that promise that capitalism claims it has.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Harry. Tarn, you're up next.
Hey, so my question was, could we have a redistributive / distributed model that looks outside of the left-right political binary? And I was just thinking how Fisher talks about psychedelics being a route to helping us imagine something new, but part of me thinks that this left-right binary is not necessarily something new, and I wonder if we can kind of think about the political spectrum rather than with it.
Yeah, I guess, I think it comes down to what you mean by left and right. And a lot of people have a lot of different things. I think I'm operating from a vague notion that the left is more prone to looking at systemic causes, to looking at problems as systemic rather than individual. And I think that is important to look at. So even in the stuff we're talking about, so if we're looking at individual trauma, it's also important to connect it to the social trauma. And I wouldn't want to give that up. And I don't think Fisher would either, because I think it's also not only about like this idea of the acid left that we're working with. Our goal isn't only to bring those positive moments, positive aspects of psychedelic culture to the left, or broadly political awareness in general, but also to bring elements of like class consciousness into the psychedelic community. So I do think for our project, at least, it is important to identify with the left rather than an apolitical stance, because we do bring in class, a class analysis to it pretty strongly. So to get back to that, like briefly, illustration of the systemic, looking at it systemically versus individually. So that difference between left and right there, I would say, is summed up in that phrase. What is it? The anti-Semitism is the socialism of fools. So whereas like the class analysis would look at this as a large societal, systemic, structural issue, you know, you could also frame those same things, pointing to a lot of the same problems, as bad actors disrupting the system, you know, rather than the system itself producing certain behaviors, certain outcomes, acting upon individuals. So I mean, I hope that answers that. Like I said, I do think there's a strong need to look at both the individual and the bigger, you know, the whole. But I think we're focusing definitely on looking at those structural sides and trying to allow the individual to recognize, you know, parts of them that are predetermined, the forces that are shaping their unconscious and their desires and producing all that, what they're acting within.
Right. I think Sam's question is a good follow-up to this. Sam, if you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. So, yeah, I appreciated what you were mentioning about the rise of the alt-right and this kind of tapping into these libidinal energies that were being loosed by them, and how there is a lot of energy in that. But I think that in recent years, as things have progressed, given our current media landscape, the incentives that are driving it, it seems like a very similar tapping into libidinal energies is happening on all corners of the political spectrum in ways that are kind of creating a lot of fragmentation and decoherence. I'm curious, given the current landscape that we're navigating and what you were talking about using memes and wanting to tap into that, what a strategic way of doing that would look like to kind of tap into those pervasive energies and canalize them or direct them in a way that would be less destructive, but also effective given what we're dealing with these days with the media ecology.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that question. So effective, I don't know. You know, I wish I could answer that. If I could, we'd probably have a huge reach if we just had that formula for what is effective. I think it's interesting because we're seeing younger and younger people enter the online spaces and social media. There's a artist and writer, Instagrammer, Twitcher, YouTuber, Joshua Ciccarella, and politics as memes, I believe, or memes as politics. I feel stupid. I can't. It's one of those. Is his podcast, and you know, he spends a lot of times in these hyper fractionalized communities and traces the development, and you see the way, you know, he traces people, how they're shifting across and around and diagonally and spiraling on the political compasses, and they're reading, you know, left communist theory at 14 and neo-fascism at 13 and stuff like that, and they're reading like this really intense stuff and becoming radicalized. So you're right, it is there. It's like that tapping into those libidinal energies is all over. I worry though, in some of the ways that a lot of it is almost like frying out people's nervous system in a way though, and not, you know, not helpful, not healing, not like you were saying. So how do we actually direct that? I guess that's by the content that, you know, you're choosing to engage with, and there's always a give and take there too. Like the more you enter the already existing meme world, the more that you're taking from memes that are currently out there, you know, you're kind of sacrificing a part of whatever you're trying to cohere around. You're giving yourself to that. But then also something to worry about is social media, memes, all of this often relies on hate. You know, I can say from experience, our memes that get the most attention are ones that early on people disagree with. So, and that's hard to avoid because like part of me, you know, wants to be like, oh, I hope someone gets mad at this. Like, you know, they say, oh, you're not a true communist, or you have no idea what the psychedelic community is. You know, we get both of those. And whenever that happens, you know, it's like almost guaranteed that, oh, this meme's going to go far. Because, you know, we're engaged in these things and we're kind of in these dopamine feedback loops, and people are getting mad and sharing it. They're getting mad and arguing. So I guess within that space, you know, you can also redirect. It's not just about posting the meme, especially if you're like a content creator and you're not just sharing memes, but maybe it goes even if you're just sharing other memes you come across. It's trying to engage in that with the people that are talking to you. You know, the meme is only a gateway. It's always going to be hyperbolic. It's always going to be, you know, over the top and maybe too on the nose, overly metaphorical. You know, so like in our podcast, we of course touch on like psychedelics like LSD and stuff like that, but we also spend more time exploring these other ideas that aren't strictly drug related psychedelia. Yet in memes, it's so much easier to connect these ideas with these like symbolic or metaphorical things. So, you know, it's so much easier to go into something hyperbolic, like throwing magic mushrooms and a copy of Das Kapital on a sandwich and be like, oh, look, it's an acid communist breakfast. You know, that's going to get people's libidinal energies caught in there, and it's going to draw attention. But you risk a lot there, and you know, you have to be building a community within that and engaging both the love and the hate that anything you're creating is getting, if you want to cohere it at all. Or you can like just try to throw wrenches in the system, but I think that is actually dangerous, to simply throw wrenches and you know, kind of hope that when it's falling apart you can dodge the pieces.
Awesome. So I'm going to skip some follow-up questions just so we can squeeze in all the questions. There's some really good ones. Kale, can you unmute yourself and go next?
Sure thing. Actually, I feel like that was a pretty good follow-up to that one, just because the idea of like, I fall into that trap of sharing the memes just because I'm trying to trigger people, you know. Getting the angry comments is always somewhat gratifying, but I guess that's the thing that I've kind of witnessed with this kind of leftist meme sharing, is it almost kind of starts to winnow itself down into these weird micro groups. And I guess that's just kind of my question. I kind of tried to, how do we make sure that we don't just kind of explore inward and get more and more insular, and try to actually use it as a form of connection kind of thing? Just because I feel like that's the trap when I talk about my hippie friends, is kind of people miss the point once they feel that connection or whatever, right? Then that kind of almost elevates their own importance, rather than realizing, oh, we all have this, we all kind of can work on this together kind of thing. I don't know. I'm terrible at verbalizing it, but.
No, I mean, I get what you're saying. You're absolutely right. That seems actually, that's like a big theme of these questions, which is great, because that's a question we have as well. You know, I wish I had strong answers for these, but I think that's something that we have to kind of come up with together, and that's what we're working for. So moving beyond, of course, you know, we were definitely guilty of it. Some of our memes or some of the things we say might be too heavily laced with irony or satirism, but moving into like actual moments of sincerity, trying to connect with other people and trying to show a softness, trying to show an understanding of of others, you know. And I think you're right. It kind of goes like with, you said, your hippie friends, how an enlightening experience can actually lead someone to become more narcissistic in some ways. And yeah, you have to fight against that. And, you know, that happens in political movements too. It's almost the same way. You see, we can look at the history of the left and see that, the history of the left in the States, and the constant fracturing of little parties into micro sects that become basically cults. You know, there's some kind of secular cult, and you want to avoid doing that. So I think creating and sharing things that really focus on a collective joy. Something I keep coming back to is part of that, you know, like, so really trying to make those things fun. Memes are one thing, but music, music is a really easy thing to collectively experience together, and it kind of pulls you both out of like whatever time that you're in and puts you in something there. So if you can infuse music with those kinds of intentions and messages, that's something, you know, that's pretty strong, and you can make it fun to listen to, so that these things appeal not just to people who are in the know, right? Like if you're only talking to a small circle, you're not doing anything and you're not expanding anything. In order to expand any other circle or group, you yourself have to expand, and you have to be able to envision you and them, you know, the us and the them together collectively experiencing something as good. So yeah, I guess that's my answer, is really trying to focus on actual collective joy and good times. Without saying like, you know, it's like, oh, it's about good vibes, man, because that's not what I'm saying either. But like really actually, the collective part, I guess, is important there.
Yeah, I like that. Serious play. So let's end with a question from Kevin about, I like what you were saying about the tutorial thing, Kevin, if you can ask that one.
Yeah. So this kind of taps into what you were just saying with like building a collective joy and like building a community. On your YouTube channel, you have a Photoshop tutorial. It was like how to make a Joe Biden doomer meme. And I've never really seen like political channels like explicitly making tutorial videos. Like, you know, I've never seen like a ConjurePoints how to do a makeup video or something like that. But I'm wondering if, so like what the relationship is between sort of educating people and making these memes and the ideology of, say, acid leftism. And like what you, well, first of all, I hope that you keep making the tutorials because your aesthetic is incredible and very visually complex, and the sounds too. So yeah, that, and I'm wondering like what, if you can sort of talk about if you plan on doing that and what the motivation and ideology surrounding that would be.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I do have to say though, I think if Natalie did a makeup tutorial video, it would break the internet. I think like, I mean, we need that, you know. I need her to show me how to contour because, you know, the beard makes it hard. I really like doing, well, I have to say Mike has done both of the tutorial videos that we have up, but I'm actually making one for this month. And I really like that idea because it's important. You know, we're going to try to explore a whole bunch of different digital creation. So he did Photoshop. I'm going to do a phone one called Mirror Lab on our next one, which is what I use to make most of my digital art and memes. You know, I do have, there's a free version. I have like the $5 paid version, but you can do anything that I'm going to show on the free version. And yeah, the point is to engage and create community, to show people how easy some of this stuff can be, to give them ideas, to kind of democratize the process itself. You know, because you don't want, if you're working in this kind of project, you don't want to simply be giving people content, but you want to, you know, be giving them the tools to create content. You want to create content that furthers their own understanding. You know, I truly believe, now not all of this stuff would fit into this, but I truly believe if you're making a great image and you're connecting a quote with a relative juxtaposition of image, that can connect something in your mind, you know, and help you understand that the concept, or like the topography of that concept in a way much deeper than you would just simply by reading it. And I don't know, maybe that's part of the way my mind works. I often visualize stuff that I'm reading, or in almost like collage fashion. So yeah, I think that's a great thing to do. And, you know, that's why we're doing like the reading groups and stuff as well, it's like the same thing, but focusing on the other side of it, is trying to get people involved, trying to break it down in a really a democratic way, between different levels of education, between different classes, age groups, creator and audience, and merging those together. So, hopefully in the future, our goal is to be able to like actually create books and stuff as well, through those kinds of processes, where we're like making visual commentaries on essays, that are made by us and our community as a process, of both documentation and creation through engaging other things.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we're gonna land here. Adam, any closing thoughts for us, where we can find you, what you're doing now, or what you're doing next?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me personally on Instagram at the @art, A-R-T, .o.dirt, D-I-R-T. It's a name I make for most of my art, is Dirt Son of Earth. You can find that on Facebook or YouTube as well. You can find the Acid Left at the Acid Left on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and we've actually just uploaded all of our stuff to a podcast service finally. So you can find it on like Stitcher and most of the other pod services. If it's not there now, it will be going up, or SoundCloud. And yeah, we're about to put out a new video essay on the YouTube channel about Mark Fisher and his infamous hatred of students who smoke weed. Being a little hyperbolic there, but it's I would say maybe a misunderstood quote from capitalist realism that's made the meme world because of how funny it sounds, basically, when taken out of context. So yeah, we're about to put out a new video essay, and we should have another podcast coming out soon. Yeah, that's it. Check them out. It's good stuff. But all of our stuff is good, and Mike is on. He has his own YouTube channel as well, which we used to upload content to before we had the Acid Left one, called Theory Wave Nights. So you can find a lot of our music and video projects on there, as well as some conversations with Terry Tapp. And yeah, and that's it.
Beautiful. So I'll make some closing announcements in a moment, but Adam, thanks so much for visiting the Stoa. It was a really fun session. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you, it was.
Yep. So I'll do some closing announcements. In about 45 minutes, we have Greg Henriquez, who's doing, he's part of a sense maker in residence here for the month of October, and it's a 21st century vision of wisdom. So that should be really cool. Laura, would you want to plug the Metamodern deep dives that we have here as well?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So Mondays, we've been having Daniel Gertz, one half of Hansi Freinacht, in the house to take us on some metamodern deep dives through art, spirituality, sexuality, and faith. I believe the next one is sexuality, so that'll be a fun one. Yeah, so that's every Monday this month at 10 a.m. Eastern.
Awesome. And Tarn is in the room right now. Tarn, you have a really cool event coming up. I was hoping to put you on the spot a little bit. I was hoping you could unmute yourself and give it a little plug.
Unexpected. Hi. Yeah, on the 28th, I'm going to be doing an event with my friend Ellie Hain on some of the problems with the sense-making scene, imagining beyond the echo chamber. Yeah, I'm going to create a discussion around that.
Thank you, Tarn. And I'm excited for that. Tarn and Ellie are two kind of insiders in the sense-making scene. So it's kind of good to have some self-critique on this space. And then tonight we have an event with, Justin Weinberg at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Justin is the editor of the Daily News blog. This is like the philosophy blog that kind of, if you want to get plugged into the academic philosophy world, this is the blog you follow. And he's doing a session called Disagreeing Well, which is very, resonant with a lot of the stuff we're talking here. So you can just check out the website for that. And the website is thestoa.ca. We have a Patreon and our Substack for a daily newsletter. So that being said, Adam, everyone, thanks so much for coming to the Stoa.